Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control. What happens when you stop organizing education around systems and start organizing it around children? More than 25 years ago, Florida launched a series of reforms that put parents in the driver's seat and transformed education in the Sunshine State, while inspiring other states to embrace and expand school choice. Today, as the teachers union sues to dismantle Florida's education savings accounts and charter school programs, which are currently serving over 1 million students, the debate over who should decide where and how children learn is still far from over. Governor Jeb Bush, Florida's 43rd governor, joins me to discuss the state's transformative A+ plan for education and groundbreaking school choice programs, the results that followed, and why the fight for educational freedom is still being waged today. Governor Bush was governor of Florida from 1999 to 2007. I had the honor of working for him in the final years of his second term. He serves as the chairman of the board of directors of Excel in Ed and the Foundation for Florida's Future. Governor Jeb Bush, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Thank you, Jenny.
We are going to be talking about the Florida Teachers Union, the FEA, new lawsuit against the Florida Department of Education. And I'm going to quote, "This lawsuit is for their failure to uphold the Constitution in ensuring every child in Florida has access to a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools." So we'll get into that lawsuit, but I'd like to review Florida's education history first. I graduated from Orange County Public Schools. I graduated from Winter Park High School back in 1992. And at that time, the state had the third highest dropout rate in the country. 1/3 of students did not graduate on time. Something like 13% of fourth graders, 14% of eighth graders were proficient in math. And even though most Florida students didn't take the SAT back then, the average score was still well below 900. So you're a big data guy. Was it these abysmal outcomes that inspired you to focus on education policy, transformative plans for the state, or was it something else?
No, I was. Part of it was I was Secretary of Commerce in the late 1980s, and I went to all 67 counties, and asked people in the business community what's their number one issue, and it was our mediocre education system is impeding our ability to grow economically. And that link to this day is still pretty powerful. But back then it was like the number one issue in the state, and there wasn't a sense of urgency about it. There wasn't everybody wanted to color inside the lines, I guess. And we were literally at the bottom. We were 50th out of 50 states in the 1990s in terms of graduation rate. And Jenny, I tell this story over and over again, but it probably encapsulated my feelings about this. I ran in 94 and lost for a lot of different reasons, most of which related to my not sharing my heart about the things I thought were important. And in 98, I decided, you know what? I still had these, what by then, back then considered radical views, but I'm going to go visit 100 schools and learn and kind of show people I don't have horns coming out of my head. And I ended up going to 260 schools in the 98 campaign. I learned a lot, and it crystallized my thinking that there needed to be more dramatic action. I'll never forget, I was at Seminole High School, pretty close to Winter Park, a little north of there, and this kid was practicing for the HSCT test. You would have taken that test. And that's an 8th grade level high school graduation test. And people were bragging that we had a graduation test. Most states didn't back then. And I'm thinking, well, 8th grade level graduation test, graduation test isn't something to be bragging about. It means you could pass 8th grade, not pass 12th grade. And this kid was practicing for the last time he could take the test. I think he could take it three times before you just couldn't go forward. And I was watching over his shoulder in the back of this high school, and the question was, the baseball game starts at 3, it ends at 4:30. How long is the game? And he couldn't answer it. So at first I thought, okay, the guy's name was Santiago. Maybe he came from another country. Maybe it was that's the reason. Newly arrived. And in fact, he had been in the K-12 system the entire time. And if you see examples of that over and over and over again, you begin to realize that a lot of kids are being left behind, and as such, there needs to be a dramatically new way of thinking about it. And that was my motivation was based on starting, I'd say, more on economic issues, but it became more of a moral imperative. I mean, we really needed to think differently about our K-12 system across the country, but particularly in Florida, which is the state I love.
You got right to work then. You won in 1998, and I met you for the first time in September 1999. And by then, you'd already moved your A-plus plan for education through the Florida legislature. And so you came to Congress to testify before the House Budget Committee, again, September of 99. And you outlined the law's guiding principles. I actually looked at the testimony again recently. It was really fun to remember all those many years ago. And you said education should be child centered. It shouldn't even be school centered. It certainly shouldn't be system centered, which it is in most places today. You were very clear that all interests should be aligned to the priorities of the child. So, what did that look like when you were envisioning that, when you were developing these guiding principles back then?
I've always been wonky on this stuff, and there were parts of other states' initiatives that I found interesting. One was actually North Carolina with Governor Hunt, who recently passed away, and the other was my brother's. What they didn't have was the catalytic converter of parental empowerment. They had other elements in terms of accountability, but they didn't have the tension that comes when systems have to empower parents. And back then, that was a big deal. I mean, the food fight, to get the Republican, there were members of the Republican caucus that did not support all of our initiatives. The school districts hated it. The unions hated it. People were nervous. Change is hard. We got it passed, and policy doesn't really matter if you don't implement it faithfully. You can pass a law. A lot of times, governors sign a bill into law and they check that box and they move on to another food group, policy food group. In this case, in order to accomplish it, we had to be all in, literally across the board. I had the what I call the A-plus plan meeting. I think it was every other week. And we had all these action items we had to implement. And Jenny, if you recall, we have 67 school districts because we have 67 counties. We were asking 67 jurisdictions to implement something they didn't like.
Yeah. To put it
So,
mildly, didn't like.
yeah, so we had to be banging heads, cajoling, convincing, persuading, advocating in a kind of a difficult environment. But in order for it to be successful, it required that. And thankfully, I had an incredible team of people. I kind of remember you were part of that.
I showed up at the end. You guys did all the hard work, and then I showed up at the end.
We did. We worked together, and then then the question is, okay, first chance to see if it works when you grade schools A through F, and if schools are F, parents get to choose a private option or a better public option. The best way to measure its success was whether or not there were gains in reading and math. And in fact, the first year that we did this with this accountability system and empowering parents, we had big gains. Had we not had big gains, it might have been harder to continue the fight because it was very controversial. Now, when you see states like Iowa have a full-blown ESA and other states, it seems like it's just, no big deal. But we were the first statewide voucher program and first state to really have, I'm not kidding, accountability. It was exciting. I mean, it was um, I loved being governor because it was a big challenge and you could benchmark it and you could measure it. And if we had success, it allowed us to implement additional reforms. The mantra was success is never final, reforms never complete. And the catalyst for all of this, apart from high expectations and robust accountability, was parents should decide where their kids go to school, over and out.
Right, and you were ecumenical about that approach. I mean, you were a longtime supporter of charter schools. You'd helped start one, and that law was already in place. And then there was also this new groundbreaking thing, the Opportunity Scholarships Program, which, of course, students shouldn't be relegated to persistently failing schools. Of course, families should have options, but like you said, that of course perception was not what the unions and the districts thought.
So in September or August of that first year, the first so-called voucher kids were allowed to go to schools. And I got convinced by my chief of staff, I think, that I had to go to the school that was losing kids in Pensacola, Florida. It was an elementary school. I was not looking forward to it, to be honest with you, because people were really upset about this. I didn't go to the Catholic school that took the kids. I went to the public school that lost the kids. And Miss Lerner, I think her name was, she was really mad. And I tried all whatever charm I had. I was trying my best to get through it. And she said, "Look, this is not fair. These kids, my kids don't even show up to school until the second week. You're telling me that I have to, have the same expectations for them than the kids that live on the other side of Pensacola." I said, "Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So if they don't come to school, let's go get them." We went door to door for a while with TV cameras saying, "Mrs. Jones, your son is school started today, and it'd be great to get him to come to elementary school." "Oh, I didn't know that." Anyway, we went door to door for a while to kind of show again that this wasn't to hurt public schools. This was to make all schools better when you empower parents and to have real accountability and make sure that student learning is the most important thing.
The program did continue for a number of years. It never got really big, in part because families had an array of options. They could also go to another public school in the district if their child was assigned to a persistently failing school. They had multiple options that they could take advantage of. And then in part because schools were really trying to not have F year after year.
No, that's the main. Yeah,
Yeah, the good news.
we tried to keep a bell curve that was not tilted to where it is today. I mean, almost all schools are A's and B's. It's time to readjust those cut scores so that you have back to that tension of accountability where there's a real focus, particularly on the lowest performing students. But back then, a lot of schools showed dramatic improvement. We put money into the schools. We didn't starve them. And schools that were underperforming got additional monies. And so there was a big burst of student learning because we had real accountability. The Corporate Tax Scholarship Program was started, the McKay Scholarship Program. These were the largest of their kind at that point as well. So the Opportunity Scholarship was the smaller part of the choice option. And then the Supreme Court did what it did.
Yes. So we're going to talk about this year's lawsuit, but first, let's talk about that lawsuit that you're referring to. And this is standard playbook for unions and districts, but often unions, if there's a school choice program that's passed, they immediately sue. I know you said you love being governor, and I remember seeing you in the final weeks of being governor, and you were just pacing. You just had so much more that you had to do. We're still loving being governor, but it wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. There was there were things like this, the Bush v. Holmes lawsuit decision.
Yeah, I mean, our Supreme Court today is dramatically different
Mhm.
than it was back then. Uh, the decision was disappointing, but we expected it.
Mhm.
And part of our strategy was to uh, defer and delay so that the benefits of the accountability system and the empowerment of parents to choose other options in failing schools would be there for people to see. Had the lawsuit happened in the first year and the court took it up and ruled it unconstitutional, um, the benefits of our system wouldn't have been clear for people. But we had huge gains. I mean, the reason why this was exciting was that it actually worked. For example, the NAEP test in 1997, the nation's report card, our fourth grade numbers, only 31 states administered the test back then, and we were 29th out of 31. And then in 20, let's call it 2005, with the implementation of all of these reforms, we were 6th out of 50. And our graduation rate started to increase. And Florida's low-income kids were number one, two grade levels ahead of, the California Hispanics were two grade levels ahead of the Hispanic or the California average. I mean, we had these lights out improvements, particularly with kids in the underserved areas. So while it was disappointing, the reforms were clear and the other options emerged: the corporate tax scholarship program, the McKay scholarship program.
And corporate tax credit, that was for, at the time, that was for low income families. McKay Scholarship was for students with disabilities.
Yeah, exactly. So if a parent was not satisfied with their individual education plan, which the federal, it's a civil rights law, they could unilaterally decide to send their kids to a private school that would take the state and local money. So tactically, the plan was to show the reforms worked. And then when I don't think we were surprised that the court ruled the way they did. I thought it was twisted logic. I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. I mean, I was disappointed with the Florida Supreme Court when I was governor on an array of different things. It wasn't just this, but it was, you know, if you stick with it, the reforms become clear, and there's a constituency that emerges, and it's been fantastic that legislatures and governors, after they kicked me out the door, continued to have embraced this idea. And now, the numbers are pretty clear. Miami-Dade County, my hometown, has the fourth largest school district in the country. And about 70% of parents choose, or 70% of children's parents decide where their kids go to school. 70%. They can go to the Florida online school. Miami-Dade has its own online capability. There's a robust charter community here. The private schools, the Catholic schools in Miami are growing in population. Not many places in the country could say that.
Florida's unique. The magnet programs,
The
that's
magnet programs are huge. Parents can customize the learning experience where it's not just one thing. Miami-Dade County is actually competing now, the school district, to attract students. It's a robust marketplace and I would say, to brag a little bit about my hometown, Miami-Dade probably has the best student outcomes of any big urban school district in the country. And that's because parents now have more say about where their kids go to school, and the economic interest of the adults is secondary to all that.
those programs that we were talking about, the corporate tax credit scholarship program, the McKay program, about 20 years ago when I was there, were serving maybe about 15,000 students each. And like you said, governors after you and legislatures after you expanded, and those have evolved to what's kind of broadly called the empowerment scholarship program. And there's one that's specifically for students with special needs, and then there's also a subset of those for homeschooled students. And you put the three categories together, and it's over 500,000 students
Yeah,
are benefiting
exactly.
from the state ESA. And then when you're talking about charter schools, that's over 400,000 students statewide. Something like 14 to 15% of K-12 students in Florida are going to charter
Yeah,
schools.
and the Step Up guys published something, which, by the way, I'm proud of my participation in this, but there are a lot of people that deserve a ton of credit. John Kirtley is certainly at the top of the list, just being doggedly determined, keep
I
raising
got
the.
calls from John when I was working for you regularly, and I'm sure everyone who
Yeah,
preceded me and came after me
thank
did as well.
thank
He
God
was
he.
on top of that implementation. Like you said, that's really important. You pass the law, he was on top of that. The implementation, he was on top of that.
Well, they just released Ron Battis. I think I saw it on LinkedIn, that over 1 million kids in Florida are going to schools of choice, because there's also, we have universal public school choice. and homeschools. You add it all up, and it's a phenomenal number. And traditional public schools are better. The argument against this is you're going to destroy so-called public education. That's not the case. In fact, the opposite is the case. And ultimately, Jenny, my dream, if I had another chance to dream a bigger dream, it would be to say, find 67 superintendents of schools in the state that I love, whose mission is to say every child in my district, whether they go to a private school, a public school, a charter school, you name it, a hybrid kind of format, homeschool, every child is my responsibility. And I'm going to give parents the power to make choices. And I'm going to do everything I can to create a safe environment where kids soar. That's the next iteration of this, where the lines need to be blurred between what's public, what's private. It's not, it might have worked in 1950, 1920. It's not relevant anymore.
Yeah, and I went to school, again, Orange County Public Schools in the 80s and 90s, and I'm not so sure it worked then. Although I do feel like I got a decent education. And that's where the current Florida Education Association, the current teachers union lawsuit makes me so angry, because I'm quite confident that people who weren't zoned to the schools I went to, Domrick, Maitland, Winter Park, in Orange County, were not getting the same, they weren't getting the same education in other
Yeah.
parts of the county. We did not have a uniform system of public school. Everybody was benefiting from the same level of quality and focus on ensuring that the children were being educated well and thriving. So pretending that that's ever been the case, and that this creation of choice is just ludicrous.
I totally agree with you. And the irony of uniformity is, yeah, there's two ways to do it. You can have high expectations for every kid, or you could have mediocrity being the uniform measurement. And the system that we had that people continued to try to protect was designed around mediocrity. That somehow it's life circumstances that assure that some kids can learn and some kids can't. The family structure, level of income, that it's not, the kids can't overcome adversity, or that you can't have a system where every child has the chance to rise up. I think, I'm pretty proud of the fact that Florida doesn't have that mindset anymore, which makes the lawsuit kind of bizarre, actually, to be fair about it. I'm kind of glad they did it to just clean this up, because it was not, the issue of the vouchers was never contested. It wasn't the issue. This will solve this, because it'll eventually get to the Florida Supreme Court. Plus, with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling as it has, it makes no sense. They're going to spend more money out of the pockets of teachers to defend a concept that is obsolete and legally on really, really, weak grounds. So my guess is it'll get blown out of the water. And I don't understand what the logic is to do this. Maybe seeking relevance, because they're increasingly less relevant.
Yeah, there was a Fordham Institute's report that came out recently that ranked Florida unions, I think, 41st out of 51, so 50 states plus DC, as far as influence and power. And so that's pretty low. And then Florida teachers don't have their paychecks automatically docked. Like there isn't an automatic deduction for union dues. They have to
Yeah.
choose. And then there have been a few additional laws about recertification of unions that have come about. So is this the FEA's kind of last gasp attempt to be like relevant, like you said, like we have some sort of say we can do this razzle dazzle lawsuit, even though it's doomed? That's the only thing I can
I,
figure.
I don't understand it. I think the teachers union ought to be focused on issues related to workplace, issues of making sure that teachers are treated with dignity and respect, that they can negotiate collectively for healthcare benefits or other things like that. That's fine. I mean, that's,
That's
public
their job.
public employees, generally that's what they do. But they have gone way beyond that, And most of these dues go for other issues other than just the collective bargaining process at every district. They're involved in, you know, views. I got an opinion on Gaza, for crying out loud. And and it's way left leaning, and it doesn't represent the views of most teachers in Florida, and so they are kind of obsolete. And you would think that based on that, they might want to go back to the fundamentals, but this publicity stunt is I don't think it's in their interest. But you know, everybody has a right in this great country to access the courts, and that's what they're doing. It allows people like you and me to have a conversation about it. It's kind of weird that they would allow us to do that.
It's a great excuse to have you on the podcast, Governor Bush. So I'll thank the FEA for that, and it also is an opportunity to dispel a few myths around school choice in Florida. And I think that's what we've been doing throughout our conversation. But you know, one thing that they talk about is how the states created a system of educational opportunities that are held to different standards, and they always imply that there's no accountability that's built into these options that we've been talking about. So obviously, charter schools are public schools, and the students take the state test. So let's set them aside. But when we're talking about the students who are benefiting from the state ESA, they have to take a nationally norm reference test and always have, right? Like,
Yep,
so I'm,
exactly.
what's the argument there, guys?
So, you know, the way I look at it is if parents want to stay in the traditional system, fine. They have that right. And there's probably more state-driven accountability, the test and accountability there. And as you move away from the traditional schools, there still is accountability, but ultimately, the further you go into the private options, parents are become the most important part of the decision making process. And the key is to make sure parents have uh, that they're making informed choices about the most important decision they make for their kids. And so the state has a responsibility to create a marketplace, if you will, where parents do have these choices. But the more responsibility they take on, the less regulation is necessary. And so I reject the argument that is made. State has a responsibility for fiscal issues for sure, because this is either directly or indirectly state money going into it. But we shouldn't try to re-regulate or try to regulate private schools as though they're traditional public schools, because parents have opted out of that system and they have to accept more responsibility, and they're willingly doing it. So, um, I guess, I mean, everybody has the ability to make an argument. I just don't find that argument that compelling. And the benefits are clear for people to see. I mean, we still are one of the nation's leaders on our the nation's report card tests. Florida's kids, the graduation rate has improved. Although, look, we could always raise the bar. I'm a huge believer of it because I think kids are smarter than adults give them credit for. And we always need to fund public education and empower parents. And you keep doing that regularly, and Florida's going to be a national leader.
I heard you say that the Florida Supreme Court makeup is different than it was back in the Bush v. Holmes 2006
A
days.
lot different.
So your prediction on the outcome is that things are going to be okay for the Florida choice programs?
Yes, totally. Totally.
One topic that's not related to this before we wrap up, you concluded your 1999 congressional testimony encouraging the folks in Washington to fund programs in a flexible way. I think you said fund programs in a flexible way that allows us, states, to carry out our mission. And you mentioned, and this is again 1999, that at the time, 40% of the Florida Department of Education staff was just there trying to comply with Washington, D.C.'s wishes. So all that federal money was then getting spent on state bureaucrats just trying to file reports back to Washington about all the federal money.
Yeah.
And you said, if you trust us, we will perform. So with Iowa and Louisiana receiving what's called returning education to the states waivers, do you think that the federal government's finally taking your advice?
I think it's a good step. It's a mini me step, not a big step. The law, you know, prohibits the kind of vision that I was trying to outline in 1999, which would be to shift all of this money that, by the way, they don't have, to shift the programs back to the states. Like 5 or 6 years ago, there were, I think, $25 billion in, call it, close to 10 different programs for early childhood work. Well, Florida's got universal pre-K. We have a really robust system of dealing, for 4-year-olds. If we took that money, we could develop a strategy. We could, we have our accountability system for those programs as well. We could take this, if we didn't have all the strings attached and we could just have the money, we could improve student learning so that kids are prepared to take on the excitement of kindergarten, not way behind. They're in the same example in Title I. Why should we have to, fill out all the forms and do all the stupid stuff to receive Title I money? Better to be part of a broader strategy. It seems to me that Title I money should run with the parent as well. Kids with learning disabilities, same thing. You go across the titles of the Department of Education. The Trump administration's done what they can within the law to push power back to the states, and I think that's great. But ultimately, this is not a federal responsibility. This is a state responsibility implemented locally. And at some point, Congress ought to shift the power back to the states for things that should be state responsibility. Not just there, by the way, but in my personal belief is that they ought to protect our shores, keep us safe, and get the hell out of the way and let states do what they do best. And then you would have California would do it different than Florida. And you'd let all sorts of innovation take place and the best ideas would prevail.
Well, Governor Bush, you certainly did it well when you were a governor. It was an honor to serve as the director of the school choice office all those many years ago. So grateful for your continued commitment to this very important topic. Right before we go, I generally ask my guests to tackle the myth that bothers them the most. Is there a Florida school choice myth that you'd want to tackle today beyond what we've already discussed?
The big myth in public K-12 education is some kids can learn, some kids can't. And then we had, organize ourselves around that myth. And I think God's given the ability for every child to learn, and it's up to adults to organize themselves in the proper way to make sure they do. It's a very different mindset than casting aside huge swaths of kids, particularly in the world we're moving towards. That myth is really dangerous now, because if you can't read and you can't calculate math and you're not curious, and you don't develop critical thinking skills, imagine what the world. I'm trying to figure out what the world looks like a year from now. At the pace that AI is moving, in 5 years, it's impossible to see what it looks like. And these kids, that are in elementary school today are going to be living in a world radically different. And so making sure they have those tools that are God-given, that's a myth we're shattering every day.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Governor Bush, thank you for your commitment to education freedom and all things good in education policy. And thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thanks, Jenny.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.